Voices told him to kill, but were those voices coming from an ancient demon possessing an old dog, or something far more sinister? Today, we're talking about the Son of Sam conspiracies on the podcast.
Hello, Willow.
Hello, Karisa. Are you prepared for today?
I'm extremely prepared for today, especially since we had to re-record this one since everything would be all wonky.
Yeah, so Carissa's actually already heard the first 20 minutes of this episode. So she gets to listen to my wonderful voice tell her the story again.
I like listening to your voice again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to take a little bit of a different spin on the Son of Sam killings. Obviously, anyone who has been in true crime for any period of time knows about these killings already. And you guys can find so many different podcasts or documentaries following the actual killings themselves.
I think there's even a new one with recordings of his voice.
Yeah, it's like the Son of Sam tapes.
Yeah.
That they just released. It might have been this year or last year, but it's very new. So you guys are able to find more information on David Berkowitz himself and the murders literally everywhere. I'm just going to give you the Spark Notes version because we're covering a different perspective and a different theory on this case. So I'm going to run through everything that happened, and I'll pause in moments and let you know certain aspects of this case that are going to be important when we're discussing theories later on, but I'm not going to delve too deeply into Berkowitz himself or the killings.
Right. And then when she's done presenting the case, I'm going to give you a little bit of basic 101 on, the different cults and different sects of religion that are involved in this case to give you the background context of this cult that's mentioned. Yeah.
So the perspective that I don't feel like is discussed very often when it comes to this case, that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah. All right. Let's begin.
To set the scene, it's 1976 in New York. The state is experiencing an economic recession, and crime rates are on the rise. It's dirty. There's a growing drug epidemic on the streets, and there's been a recorded 4,000 victims of serious crime in the past year in 1975. Yet the mayor of New York at the time, Abraham Beame, wanted to lay off large amounts of the police force to combat the financial crisis. What could possibly go wrong in this perfect storm? On July 29, 1976, in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx, 18-year-old Donna Loria sits in a car with her friend, 19-year-old Jody Valenti. Suddenly, 2 shots ring out, and the glass windows of the vehicle explode. Donna is killed instantly, but Jody was only shot in the thigh and was able to provide a description for police of a man with curly hair who's roughly 5'8" and about 200 pounds. 3 months later, on October 23rd, 1976, Carl De Niro, 20, meets Rosemary Keenan, 18, at a bar. They leave together, planning to spend the night at Carl's house in Queens. While parked just outside, the glass of the car explodes as shots ring out. Carl is shot in the head but remains conscious enough to yell for Rosemary to drive. Later, Carl awakens around 4 a.m. in the hospital with his head wrapped and 2 detectives asking if they need to call his mom for him. According to Carl himself, his response was, "As long as I'm home by 7, she'll never know I was gone." That, of course, wasn't the case for Carl, as detectives informed him that since he was shot in the head, he wouldn't be going home anytime soon. Around the time of this second shooting, the story began to capture the attention of journalists. These shootings were random. They weren't domestic, drug-related, or even robberies gone wrong. And that, even for a crime-infested New York, was a big story. Just over a month later, on November 27th, 1976, 2 days after Thanksgiving, 16-year-old Donna DeMasi and 18-year-old Joanne Lamino head home after a late night to Joanne's house in Queens. Suddenly, they are approached by a man who shot each girl once, injuring Donna and permanently paralyzing Joanne. Joanne, however, had gotten a good look at the man, and she produced from her testimony the first sketch of the killer that was put out in the press. At this time, however, different jurisdictions of the police force didn't yet believe that these shootings were connected. Authorities claimed also on various news sources that they never had a perpetrator who did not look like their sketch. as if they were trying to put some ease in the public's mind that since they had the sketch, they were going to catch the killer pretty soon. However, 2 months after this, on January 30th, 1977, 26-year-old Christine Freund and her 30-year-old fiance, John Deal, were shot while sitting in the car in Queens. John wasn't mortally injured, so he was able to speed away, but Christine had been hit twice and unfortunately later died in the hospital. After investigating this shooting, authorities found that Christine and John had been shot with a .44 caliber bullet, which they noted was unusually large for what detectives commonly found in the area. Then, on March 18, 1977, 19-year-old Virginia Voskirchian, and I'm very sorry if I mispronounce that last name, was shot in the head while walking home from the university, and she died instantly. This attack occurred in the same area where Christine and John had previously been attacked, as Christine and Virginia lived in the same neighborhood. This is also when ballistics proved that all of these attacks had been done with the same gun and the same bullets. Finally, the authorities went public with the information that they now believed the same person had committed all of these shootings. Enter now journalist Maury Terry, the true star of our story today. In the summer of 1977, right in the midst of the widespread panic these attacks by the now named .44 caliber killer had caused, Terry was 31 and working as the editor for the IBM magazine. He was keeping up with the news coverage of the killings and attacks just like everyone else around him, watching as women rushed into the salons to cut their hair or dye it blonde, in an attempt to avoid the gaze of the killer, who was now rumored to like long brunette hair. The streets were drying up at night as more and more citizens gave themselves a curfew of sunset to avoid becoming the next victim of these attacks. However, Maury Terry was looking at this case a bit differently than those around him. He was described as eternally inquisitive, and a friend said that he had a memory like a trap, as he could recite all the statistics of his favorite sports teams at any time, which is pretty important when we get into theories later.
Which you and I had said, this is kind of a male genetic thing.
Yeah.
Because my husband can recall, like, sports stuff that I'm like, how do you remember,
That's
all that
true.
information?
That's
true.
true.
And yet, when I just talked to you, 30 seconds ago, you're like, wait, I don't remember you telling me that.
Like, what? Yeah, like my husband, so his favorite game is Overwatch. And the way that this man comes to me and says, well, according to the lore, and then recites all these different backstories and connections that all these characters have, I'm just like, okay. But he too doesn't remember how old the dogs are or what meds they're supposed to be on. And I'm like, How?
Yeah, it's definitely a strange filing system that men have when it comes to remembering certain things.
Yes. Yeah. The importance they put on certain information.
Yes. All right. And back to the case.
On April 17th, 1977, 18-year-old Valentina Soriani and her 20-year-old boyfriend, Alexander Esau, sat in Valentina's car outside of her house when they were both shot twice. Alexander died on the scene, and Valentina later died in the hospital. Left at that scene was the first handwritten note by the killer, stating, "I am deeply hurt by your calling me a woman hater. I am not. I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house, some rest. Mostly young, raped and slaughtered, their blood drained. Just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic, too. I can't get out, but I look out the window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider." Further along in the note, the killer states, "I am the monster, Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth. I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. And then, Mr. Borelli, sir, I don't want to kill anyone, no, sir. No more, but I must honor thy father." In this moment, he's speaking directly to Detective Borelli, who was one of the lead investigators on the case of the .44 caliber killer. This note was the first time the killer became known instead as the son of Sam. During this time, too, there was a true crime reporter named Jimmy Breslin, whose newspapers people bought simply because his name was associated with them. And quick note, I told you this before, but I'm going to bring it up again. Did you notice in the documentary that we both watched that Jimmy Breslin wrote or typed on his typewriter with just his index fingers and not all of his fingers?
So I did not notice that, but something I did not mention when we first tried to record this was I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that men didn't take typing class.
Didn't think about that.
So women were more apt to take the class than men back then, possibly. Their typing skills may have not been as great.
That is so interesting. I didn't even think about that.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true. I just kind of thought about that. Like maybe he wasn't trained to type with his fingers like, a female would have been back then.
That does make sense. I remember watching the documentary and being so stuck on watching how this man was just typing with only his index fingers. And I just was like, I don't know. That is bleh. Like, that's what it is. Bleh. I don't like that. Anywho, the son of Sam sent a letter directly to Breslin, who, in true sensationalist fashion, immediately published it. This was one of the first times the news media took part in creating the story instead of just reporting it. This letter in particular is crucial not only to the case itself, but also to the theories that Maury Terry took and created on the son of Sam killings. In the letter, there are several phrases of note, including Duke of Death and John Wheaties. Terry took note of these nicknames, especially as he delved deeper into the case of these killings and their perpetrator. On June 25th, 1977, the seventh attack in 11 months took place as 17-year-old Judy Placido and 20-year-old Sal Lupo were shot while sitting in Lupo's parked car. Both survived the attack, and Sal would chillingly report later that the two had just been discussing the son of Sam attacks right before they were shot at. The city was coming up on the anniversary of the first shooting at this point, and the killer had even referenced Donna Loria in his letter to Jimmy Breslin. This caused the entire police force to suspect that the killer would be prowling the streets on that year's anniversary, so the entire force was out that night. They even put wigs on detectives and parked them in areas where they suspected the perpetrator would be. One detective even recalled another saying to him, "Remember when you kiss me tonight, to keep your eyes open." The anniversary of the first killing was quiet. There were no attacks, but neither were there any arrests or new leads in the case. Instead, 2 days later, on July 31st, 1977, Stacy Maskowitz, 19, and Robert Vellante, 20, were shot while sitting in their car on their first date in Brooklyn. This was the first attack on a blonde woman, and it remains one of the most infamous Son of Sam killings. Robert lost his left eye, but he did survive the attack. Unfortunately, Stacy died at the hospital 18 hours later. Robert later reported that he had promised his parents that night that he would stay in Brooklyn and away from Queens for fear of further attacks. Eyewitnesses later reported to authorities that they had seen a yellow Volkswagen that they believed was probably the getaway car for the killer. Other authorities reported also having written several tickets that night. After reviewing the records of those tickets, the police came across a name, David Berkowitz, who owned a Ford Galaxy, but who had also been on the police's radar after reports of harassing his neighbor in Yonkers. Now, why was a guy from Yonkers in Brooklyn on that particular night? As this unfolds, the environment surrounding the police force in the city has completely changed, and this is crucial to understand. After the death of Stacy Maskowitz, the police came under immense pressure to solve this case and catch the person responsible. People were very vocal about their dislike of there being no further leads in the case beyond the 5 different sketches from survivors and eyewitnesses that the police were trying to work with. And these 5 sketches were all different. There were some sketches where a guy's hair was parted differently versus another. The hair color and type changed, the facial structure changed. None of these were honestly the same to each other. Soon after finding Berkowitz's name on the records of written tickets, a detective called into another jurisdiction to try and obtain more information on Berkowitz himself. The dispatcher who happened to answer the phone was a woman named Wheat Carr, and she happened to know Berkowitz. She told the detective that he had shot and killed their black lab, Harvey, who belonged to their father, Sam Carr. As soon as the detective heard that name, he knew David Berkowitz must have been their guy. I also have to move around and mute my microphone so you don't hear the squeaking of my squeaky chair.
That's funny. But I want you to, while you were doing that, I wanted you to put a huge asterisk next to her name, okay? Mm-hmm. So we can circle back to her. When we start talking, remember her name when we come back to the conspiracy theories and something I thought about with this particular person.
Ooh, very exciting. All right.
Okay. Just remind me that I need to tell you that.
Okay. I'll try to remember.
Okay.
When police pulled up to the apartment where Berkowitz lived, they saw his Ford Galaxy parked out front, and they went ahead and performed a search without a warrant. In this search, they were able to find the .44 caliber revolver in the glove compartment and another letter written by the son of Sam claiming that another attack was going to occur in Long Island. After this search, the police continued to stake out the apartment, waiting for Berkowitz to walk out. When he finally did, he was confronted by the police, who asked if he was David Berkowitz, and his reply was, "No, I'm the son of Sam, and you got me." So after Berkowitz was caught and made his claim, his infamous claim of being told to kill by a ancient demon that possessed a black lab named Sam, why was Maury Terry not satisfied with the story the police were telling the public? Why wasn't he, too, celebrating with the rest of the employees at IBM that the killer was off the streets and New York was safe again? Because Maury Terry never believed that David Berkowitz acted alone. To begin with, Terry couldn't help but notice that Berkowitz didn't actually resemble any of the sketches that had been made, despite authorities previously having claimed that they never had a perpetrator not look like their sketch. How could they then have been wrong 5 times? Terry also noticed how standoffish the cars were after the whole incident. They were Berkowitz's neighbors, after all. They'd been seeing the same news as everyone else, so why were they giving the press the cold shoulder? Terry wanted to know more, so he did what any good investigative journalist would have done in the 70s. He went to the phone book. There, listed at the same address as Sam Carr, was his son, John Wheat Carr. Hadn't the son of Sam letter listed the nickname John Wheaties? After beginning to speak about some of his suspicions, a friend of Terry's showed him a photo of John Carr, who actually bore a striking resemblance to one of the sketches made of the killer based on testimony from a survivor. Not only that, but Terry and his friend also recalled that when they used to go to high school with John Carr, his nickname was actually John Wheaties. Now, Maury Terry was a religious man, as he was Catholic. He could very much have gotten swept up into Berkowitz's story of the demon dog that made him kill. But even more than that, Terry wanted the truth, and he didn't believe the sensationalized stories in the newspapers. So he approached the editor of the Gazette with his story and theory that Berkowitz didn't act alone. They didn't immediately take his story, but instead encouraged him to keep digging, which is how he ended up with a press pass and a new partner, Zuckerman. Early reports of the shooting of Stacy Moskowitz seemed suspicious to Terry immediately. Tommy Zano, a key witness, even stated in an interview, "I didn't think it was Berkowitz then, and I don't think it was him now." Now, the reason why we're going to delve a little bit into this shooting specifically is because at 2:33 a.m. the day of the shooting, Berkowitz was seen getting a parking ticket. At 2:35 a.m., 5 blocks away, Zano witnessed the shooting occur. That's only 2 minutes or less for Berkowitz to get from his car to 5 blocks away to the attack. No matter how Zuckerman and Terry put this together, they could not figure out how Berkowitz could have gotten from his car to do the shooting in that amount of time. It just didn't work. So Zuckerman and Terry went ahead and took this information to the New York Post, where they met with Jim Whitaker, a former NYPD detective turned journalist who had actually befriended Berkowitz in a psychiatric ward in Brooklyn. Berkowitz had claimed to Whitaker that there was nothing sexual about the murders, and he had even passed Whitaker a note that read, "People want my blood, but they don't want to listen to what I have to say. This is all a plot. There are other sons out there. God help the world." After this, Zuckerman and Terry compiled a list of all of their evidence, and they presented it to the authorities in an attempt to reopen the investigation, but the district attorney denied the request. Terry figured that the authorities wanted this all to go away and that they had been sloppy and hadn't been very thorough in their investigation. They had broken into Berkowitz's car without a warrant, and they had never even interviewed John Carr or really done a thorough interview of the rest of the Carr family. And you have to understand that after this arrest, the police force conducted the largest promotion in the city's history. The mayor, too, was also up for re-election that year, so having this arrest was really good for his image. I'm very inclined to agree with Terry here that the investigators wanted to be done with this and didn't really want to dig any deeper to find any other information beyond the fact that we caught the killer, and now the state is safe. Not too long after this, a local teen told Terry that a path behind the Carr home, which is behind the Berkowitz apartment, led to an aqueduct under Untermeyer Park. This park and aqueduct were secluded and very dark at night. When they got there, Terry noted, and this is very graphic, so you can skip ahead if you'd like, that there was graffiti along the walls and that there were mutilated and dead animals left in the aqueduct. There were also partially burned and mutilated German shepherds half buried nearby. To Terry, this was proof that cult activity was occurring in that aqueduct. Nearby was also an abandoned pump building. Inside, there were bloodstains on the floor, and the blood had been used to write symbols on the walls. Locals, including the teenage guide, would also called this building the Devil's Cave. Locals would also report chanting and a group dressed in robes visiting the building. It was rumored that this was a meeting place of a group known as the Children, which we're going to get into in a little bit here. Terry suspected that the Carrs and Berkowitz may have had something to do with the group, especially since Terry was able to find some references to the occult in the Son of Sam letters. The Son of Sam symbol itself actually dates back to a 19th century talisman drawn by the black musician Alpheus Levi. And on one of the descriptions, because we talked about this in our previous recording that will never see the light of day, one of the descriptions on the symbol, if it's put or spelled backwards, reads Sam Carr or Carr Sam. And on the other side, there is a inscription that I believe states Berkheil. So that's kind of how they were tying together the Carrs and then Berkowitz. Additionally, the path leading to the aqueduct and Devil's Cave was known as the gutters in the neighborhood, which could have been what David Berkowitz was referencing to in his first Son of Sam letter with the introduction of hello from the gutters. With this additional information, Terry was still planning to use his connection with Midiger to get to Berkowitz for more details. However, Midiger ended up falling under investigation and was later arrested due to a handful of photos that he had taken of Berkowitz from jail, which was actually very illegal. So Terry lost his first tie to Berkowitz. Just days after the arrest of David Berkowitz, John Carr disappeared. Terry continued to drive past the Carr house repeatedly to see when John would return, and about 6 months later, he saw John's car back at the residence. However, just days later, Terry learned that John had died by suicide very soon after his car had shown back up at the residence. But this happened in Minot, North Dakota.
Which is thousands of miles away.
Yeah, thousands of miles away. It's a very relatively small town with only about 5,000 residents.
Well, it's an Air Force base. So
yes, it is.
It's a mix of people.
So Terry traveled to North Dakota to speak with the officers about the incident with John Carr. John's body had been found in the local base housing. The report stated that a man had been trespassing, so the police went to the house where the man was reported to be. However, as soon as they approached and announced themselves, they heard a gunshot, and John had shot himself. During their investigation of John Carr's suicide, the police were able to find that Berkowitz and John were associates, and that Berkowitz had actually visited Minot not long before being arrested. There were also friends of John claiming that he had been drawing the Son of Sam symbol for months before the first letter ever arrived in the news in New York. Maury Terry was also able to track down Lee Slater. I think it's Slater or Slagter? I can't remember exactly, but it's something along those lines. But he was a therapist who had met with John Carr on several occasions. Slater reported that John had thought someone was going to kill him and had said that he was in trouble with the law back in New York. He said he had information that the police would want, and Slater reported suspecting that John was involved or participating in some kind of witchcraft. Other locals of the Minot area claimed that John led a cult, killed German shepherds, drank blood, and would paint demonic symbols on the trees in the area. Further rumors said that John was forced to kill himself because he was going to tell everything that he knew. Being the responsible police force and authorities that they were, the Minot police tried to send everything that they had found to Brooklyn. But the NYPD ignored them and gave them the impression that they did not believe anything that the Minot authorities had provided. After returning from North Dakota, Terry was finally able to publish his findings. Since the police force wasn't going to listen to him, he put it in the newspaper. From this, the Queens District Attorney, Santucci, called a press conference and wanted to reopen the case to investigate the possible occult ties to the Son of Sam killings. Frank Anthony on What's Happening America, which was a TV show at the time, even conducted his own investigation following Terry's footsteps to try to work against Maury Terry, just to see if he could find any issues in Terry's case. However, nobody that Frank Anthony interviewed ever disputed anything that Terry had found and told Anthony. John Carr's own sister, Wheat Carr, said that she couldn't deny that John was involved in a cult. However, even after this, the NYPD still refused to investigate further. And this isn't even where the theory ends. It's really just the beginning. John Carr also had another brother, Michael Carr, who was involved with many different drug-related addictions and also became involved in Scientology. Eventually, he became a high-level, I believe, auditor in the group, but he still wanted something more spiritual. The more Terry began to dig deeper into Michael Carr, the more he began to find about another group with roots in Scientology called the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which was established in London in 1963 by Robert and Marian de Grimston. I know you have a little bit more information about the Process Church, Karissa, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But it's worth noting that apparently German Shepherd dogs were a symbol for the Process Church, and we've unfortunately talked a little bit about them already.
There's a tie-in to just dogs in general with evil and Satanism. So it's more of like where the Process Church came from to kind of get that over-filtration of the German Shepherd part and the black dog aspect.
Jeez. Okay. Well, anyway, I have a little bit further to go, and then I'm going to learn all these awful things that you have to tell me. As Terry was investigating the Process Church, he discovered something even more astonishing. In 1968, the Process sent groups to major U.S. cities, and one of the neighbors of the branches of the Process was, in fact, Charles Manson. Some do claim that Manson learned what he knew from the Process, although this isn't conclusive, it's just alleged. Manson did, however, write a piece for the Process magazine. So could this mean that the Son of Sam killings, the Carrs, and Manson all had a tie? In 1972, the Process went underground before splintering, and one new group that evolved after this, and possibly from this splintering, but that Carissa's later going to tell us more about, is the Children. Both Manson and Berkowitz favored chaos, and they mentioned a lot about the occult in many of their writings, which is another reason why Terry thought this might have linked them together. In 1976, Terry received a letter from Berkowitz, who stated that he was guilty of the crime and also admitted that he was part of a cult and that John had died because of his ties to that same cult. In this letter, however, Berkowitz wrote a line that would haunt Terry for the rest of his life. That line was, "Maury, the public will never truly believe you no matter how well your evidence is presented." Maury Terry would also later receive a package containing a book on witchcraft. On a page in Berkowitz's handwriting were the words, "Arliss Perry hunted, stalked, slain, followed to California, Stanford University." This was a reference to a woman by the name of Arliss Perry, who was murdered in a church at Stanford University in 1974 on October 13th. I'm going to go into a bit of a graphic description, so you may skip ahead if you'd like to. She was found halfway under a pew, naked from the waist down, with one candle placed inside her in a very graphic area, and an ice pick shaft shoved into her skull. In 1981, Berkowitz sent a letter to the California detective to inform him that he had information about the Perry case. And Maury Terry ended up pleading with the detectives to be careful with their interview of Berkowitz, as he believed that if they didn't handle it well, Berkowitz may never talk again. And in fact, this was what happened. They did not handle the interview well. Berkowitz ended up clamming up, stating that if he said any more, the cult would kill his father and they would think that Berkowitz was a snitch. Now, both Terry and I believe Berkowitz at this time had thoughts that a particular individual, I believe it was the guard, they figured that he was the one who had committed the murder, but I'll talk about it a little bit later. Nobody believed him, and in fact, around this time is when Zuckerman actually stopped working with Terry because he thought that Maury Terry was getting a little bit too much into his own theories. Before that, though, a prison informant named Vinny wrote to Terry and Zuckerman and claimed that he also had information about this case. They believe that Berkowitz had been a part of a cult. He had said that Stacy Moskowitz's murder had a motive and that it was on film. It was meant to be a snuff film that was later going to be sold. Now, this specific path that this information led down ended up being false. So I'm not going to go into detail about this one too much, because this was a moment where Terry kind of did fall a bit too much into his own conspiracies. And this was also the point when Zuckerman ended up parting ways because he just did not believe in this information. But this was also the moment when Terry truly believed that he was right about everything. So in 1987, he wrote and published The Ultimate Evil, which was a compilation of everything that he had found, all of his evidence. This is also when, kind of around this time and very soon after, is when we're going to delve a little bit more into the like satanic panic and stuff with Karissa. So kind of keep note of this, of what's happening at the time that I'm talking about, because when Karissa talks more about this cultural aspect, I think we're going to see some ties here that may have influenced Terry, but also very much influenced the public. I also believe that this is really when he got caught up in the sensationalism of satanic panic. He really wanted to get his evidence out there, so he was willing to talk to anybody who wanted to hear, but I don't think he realized how sensationalized his evidence was about to become. Now, in 1993, Berkowitz finally agreed to speak with Maury Terry. Terry reported that Berkowitz was very polite and well-spoken, and that Berkowitz told Terry that he felt tormented as a child and felt drawn to the darkness when he came out of the army. He also felt that when he came out of the army, he was very vulnerable and he needed friends, but that also made him very moldable, so to speak, because he was in this immense transition. He stated feeling a force, like a dark force, in Untermeyer Park, and that he witnessed some animal sacrifices, and he talked about witchcraft and black magic. He stated that he had taken an oath that he would serve the devil, and that he had to give pictures of his family to the cult because if he betrayed the cult, they would kill him and kill his family. Now, I watched this interview because parts of it were in the documentary. I do believe that some of the questions Terry asked were a little bit leading.
Very leading.
But yeah, I also think, because this isn't the only interview he does with Berkowitz.
Yeah, I know. But both of I think the second one was a little bit more.
Yes.
He allowed Berkowitz to answer more, but I do feel there was a lot of leading just to prove himself instead of just allowing the interview to happen.
Yes.
And at the second interview, Berkowitz had plenty of opportunities, one, to read his book, and two, the guy had the availability to get his hands on what his theories were to be able to like make him feel whatever.
Yep. And I also think in watching this interview specifically, maybe a little bit in the second one, but this interview specifically, I felt like when I was watching David Berkowitz talk, this man is fully aware of the effect of his words. I believe that whether or not he actually at the time believed that he was being influenced by a demon, he knows how sensationalized his words become. He knows.
He's also claiming to be at two different states of mind in different interviews. The first one, he's still kind of at the end, I'm in prison, I want to get my whatever. The second one, he supposedly has found God and he's ready to reveal. However, if you are in a cult that is killing people for knowing any information, and there's that one interview where you could see that someone came and sliced his throat. Mm-hmm. He has a desire to live, so revealing certain things may not be in his best interest.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But nodding his head and like whatever. So there's so many different ways to analyze these interviews.
Yeah, it's interesting, but there were sometimes when he was talking, I was like, okay, is he just saying this because he's trying to be a part of the story? Mm-hmm. Or is he actually telling the truth?
Yeah, but I also think that Maury, at a certain point prior to him kind of going off the mental rails with this case, there was a point where he was finding things out that made a lot of sense.
Yes.
And that was a pivotal point where where Berkowitz was like, yes, you're on the right track. Yes, you're figuring this out. But then it's like, yeah, but you're at the same time, you're going off the rails.
You're going too far. Yeah.
You've gone too far.
And that's what I think too, because I mean, there really were a lot of things, I even have in my notes, the last few pages of my notes I didn't get to type out. There were a lot of moments where when I was watching this and doing my research, I was like, you really can tie a lot of this together. Like the Carrs, I cannot believe that they did not investigate further into the Carr brothers and into Sam Carr himself. There were actually rumors that Sam Carr, the father, was very abusive, and that he did in fact not exactly tie up, but like a punishment he would use would be to put his children in the attic and lock them in the attic. And that was in one of the Son of Sam letters. I know you had said, hey, are all the Son of Sam letters in his handwriting? Which I'm interested to hear kind of your thought on that.
The note that was passed to the one guy that basically was like, there's more. This is kind of the infancy of Terry's stuff. In the infancy of that, before Terry's stuff had really been published, I should say, to where Berkowitz would not have known Terry's theories, he passes a note to someone stating there are others, that he is kind of like, you know, he knows what he's done, but he wasn't the only one, okay? His handwriting in that has a different slant. Even if you were to capitalize all your letters, because you can write a murder letter of a cult serial killer type situation all in capitalized letters and everything like that. But then when you go and write freely and you do it in lowercase, the slant's still different.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because I noticed that even with my
the pressure when he crosses his T's is different from which direction you go from. So it would be interesting to see if the handwriting is from Berkowitz or if somebody else in the group of Sons of Sam wrote it and gave it to Berkowitz.
Yeah.
And that he was the keeper of those letters whenever something happened.
And to pass along. Because it's almost like they want to be known, but they also don't want to be known. Like they want people to suspect them, but not to actually know like who they are, so to speak.
Yeah, and if the person speaking in third person, like I am the son of Sam, or these are the sons of, this is the son of Sam, and retelling the story per se. Yeah. While we're on this, and before I forget, and before I get into like the cultural side of the process church of and all the other things, the dispatcher. What was the relationship of the dispatcher to the Carrs?
Wheat Carr was their sister. She was John and Michael's sister.
Okay. So this is something I thought of. This whole family was involved somehow, some way. And later it was found that there were women that were a part of this cult, the Children. Who's to say that she wasn't infiltrating the justice system as a deputy to no one's certain, because supposedly Berkowitz did commit certain shootings, but he claims he also was a lookout for some.
Yeah.
Specifically the one when his car is 5 blocks away. Who's to say that this particular car dispatcher female was not a part of the group and that she wasn't considered like, okay, it's being reported now. We're going to place blame on Berkowitz. Oh yeah, I know Berkowitz. So her story starts this whole line to Berkowitz. She's the one link that leads to Berkowitz. Oh, you just happened. So she's the dispatcher that gets the call.
Yeah, because the Carrs were also sitting there and saying, oh, well, talking about how he's killing their dog and whatnot. Like they were the reason, the Carrs were the reason why Berkowitz ever came on police radar in the first place. They're the only reason why police already knew his name. If they hadn't gone and said, oh, well, he's harassing us, he shot our dog, which again, I mean, yeah, he shot their dog. They probably should say something about that. But either way.
Or, I mean, did he, or is that what they're saying? You take the blame for all of this. You are our person. You are the scapegoat in this situation. And that was a part of his acceptance. Like, I have to take the blame for this.
I was about to say, he could have just done it because that was the agreement. You take blame or you die. Yeah.
And he's taking the blame for some of it. Listen, just so everybody knows, I'm not advocating that he's not a killer or is a killer. I'm saying that, yes, he's said he did this, but at the same time, I feel like he did not act alone. And I think there are way more pieces. And not looking into the Carrs is so crazy that maybe there were other people in the police force that were at play. Because we know, based on the fact that the Process Church of Final Judgment is actually tied to Scientology. And we know how deep that goes.
Yes, and it is, and we also know not only from this case, but from multiple cases, we know how corrupt the police force can allegedly be for legal purposes, how allegedly corrupt they could possibly
especially in the 70s of New York. We know that. I mean, it's sensationalized in Hollywood, but we also know that it's not completely false.
Yes.
Do you have anything else to add before?
I mean, the rest of my notes were from like the last episode, because it is a docuseries that we had watched.
I feel like that was a wasted episode.
Do what?
I feel like that was a wasted episode, to be honest.
It kind of was. Yeah.
It's like, why did we do this extra hour?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few spots where they're kind of tying together, like the yellow Volkswagen belonged to somebody who was in the Children cult, and so that's why they were like, oh, the shooting, the Moskowitz shooting was probably for this snuff film, which I never actually found that film by the by. So it was kind of interesting to see that. But the most interesting thing that I saw was at the very end. If you remember when I talked about how Maury Terry had received that book on witchcraft with the handwriting about Arliss Perry, and so then he thought, oh my gosh, could her death be tied to this whole thing? And he suspected that it was the guard, but they never
proved it,
found any proof. Fast forward to 2018, the guard's name was Crawford. He's the one who found Arliss and reported it. He was finally found guilty of that crime. I believe it was through DNA evidence. And when police went to arrest him, he completed suicide. He shot himself. They then did a search of his apartment to go through and, as they do, see if they could find more information. In a box in his apartment was Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil. And that just kind of gave me chills, because then I was like, my goodness gracious, what if he... that specific connection I thought was interesting, but when I was first watching it, I was like, that might just be him going down the deep end. But when I saw that, I was like, wow, what if he wasn't going off the deep end on that one?
Right.
So let's hear some stuff that you have to say about the cult and stuff, because I've thrown all this information at you.
Basically, here's the case. Yeah, here's the case.
And so now that we've gone through all that, let's hear all the other things that could have possibly been a part of this case.
Well, so I feel like what's not really delved deep into in this case is something that we need to understand the context of the religious side in the background. I need to compare kind of like the Process Church of Final Judgment, which is brought up in this case. But the thing is, that came from Scientology. The original founders of the Process Church were Scientologists in London. And they talk about that just briefly. Well, I wanted to kind of start by just kind of talking about these two groups, and then get into the Satan churches, the satanic panic type thing that was going on. But you kind of have to build, because there's a whole Satanist movement that's separate from this. And then they kind of cross paths in a way and come to a point. So first, let's talk about the Process Church, which I did read a little bit about this in my ASU classes, because I did this whole mysticism class with Professor Charles Barfoot, who is a Harvard graduate. I took a couple of his courses. He was a great professor when it came to the things that he presented were very unique. And one of the things in this class was the Timothy Leary experiment, which was the Harvard LSD hallucinogen experiment that happened. Yeah. Well, I took a couple of this professor's classes, and in this particular class, so like in the 1960s, 1970s, the Process Church kind of reached out to different groups, including some of them that involved a lot of psychedelic movements, which Timothy Leary was the main flow of that movement in that time frame. These were going on simultaneously. The Process Church is suspected to have reached even and approached the Manson family. We talk about that, the family.
Yeah.
Right. And that there's some kind of a crossing paths of there, which is a completely different story on its own. There's a book called Love, Sex, Fear, Death. This is by Timothy Wiley, and it details the Process Church's history, and it mentions some interactions with Timothy Leary. And I think in Maury Terry's book, there in The Ultimate Evil, he discusses a possible link between the Process Church, some of the crimes, and the crossing of paths with Timothy Leary's groups.
Yeah,
because Timothy Leary had, oh my gosh, he had like this huge house with like all these just people would just come in and like these orgies and like these love, sex, hallucinogens. It was crazy. Yeah. But there's definitely an inhabited overlap of counterculture spaces with these two groups. But they're not a lot of credible sources, and like you can't really take them as like they had some kind of meaningful alliance with each other or something like that.
Yeah.
But there was an overlap. Doesn't mean that they work together. It just means there's a psychedelic part of it and all that. Okay. Nevertheless, here we go. The Process Church of Final Judgment was a religious group. Again, we talked about how the founders were Scientologists, which I'll talk about that in a second. That was mainly active in the 60s and 70s. The Process Church was known for their unconventional beliefs. Their beliefs literally mixed Christianity, Satanism, and Gnostic ideas.
Yeah. Which is wild.
Which is crazy because I shouldn't use the word crazy. It is wild. So for most should understand that the basic foundation of Christianity is about Jesus Christ being the savior of the world through death. This is in basic terms, of course, like with any other religion, there are various paths within which this religion or this ideology kind of is different. And like I said, I'm going to define the others with Satanism and Gnostic as well. Gnosticism, most people don't realize that this is a term that is related to a collection of ancient religious ideas and systems, and there were a lot of things found in like the Dead Sea Scrolls back in the day, which I got to see these on tour. It was really fascinating to see these ancient texts on tour. Oh my gosh, maybe like early 2000s. I think they were in Ohio. So the word gnosis basically means knowledge. It's about having this secret knowledge that kind of leads to your salvation. A lot of people may not know this, but like dualism, a lot of our founding fathers were dualists. A lot of people say this country was founded on Christianity. However, it was dualism. That these were men who believed in dualism, which is basically you have your physical and you have your spiritual, that they in a tandem situation. It's kind of like you reject the material world for the spiritual. Like you have to come to an understanding of rejecting this physical, mortal plane to reach your spirituality, which we talk a little bit when we were talking about reincarnation in a way.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so material is bad, essentially. And materialism is kind of created by a lesser deity. We're not going to get into the names of this because it's going to be super confusing for people, because there's a lot of like overlapping of like Yahweh, and that's a Christian thing, but then Yahweh in this situation might be a lesser god, so it can get a little bit kind of tricky, but essentially the true God is transcendent, okay? And this divine spark in human which needs to awaken. You have this process church, it's like you have this divine spirit inside of you that needs to awaken. You can only be like edified through this knowledge, but we're going to overlap that with the fact that we do, like, they do recognize that Jesus is a person and that his process was to bring the knowledge here, not to save us, through his death. It's a completely different role for Jesus, as in Christianity. But again, like I said, in most religions, and especially the ones that I've studied, there are different sects of these religions. This is the basic 101 version of what these things are. You can imagine the process church kind of like building a thought process inside of the children, but they kind of veer off on their own a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Because you mentioned the dogs. The process church did not kill dogs. They revered dogs, just like a lot of the Native American people in that area, as being intellectual, spiritual, divine bringers of knowledge.
Okay.
So it would not make sense that if the children were still following the process, that they were going to be killing dogs.
That makes sense, yeah.
There would be a difference of beliefs. But then again, the process church eventually died out and turned into other thought processes. Like it went from being the process to other things. Like people kind of shot off and did their own thing, which would make sense with the, Okay. I'm gonna again talk more about the Satanism here in a few minutes, since it seems to be kind of like the main focus of the Son of Sam. But back to the process church, I remember that there was this unity of opposites when I was reading it, kind of like the dualism. But like there was an article I remember from ASU, and I can't find it. I was trying to look for it, could not remember when I was reading this. But it is the idea that Christ and Satan are working together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this is kind of where controversies over cults like the Manson, the family spawned, maybe even like these urban legends about cult activities and stuff. A lot of the Gnostic thoughts from the process church got kind of pushed away. And then it only kind of pushed some of the Christian values away. And then it only kind of focused more in on the Satan values. Like there was it's almost like the three parts of the process church. The Satanistic part of it was becoming the larger focus, changing the ideas and the beliefs, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think
it's kind of like Mormonism.
Okay. Yeah.
So in Mormonism, the founder, Joseph Smith, he founded Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When he died, his wife wanted the church to kind of grow with her sons as the next prophet, but that's not what happened. It ended up going to Brigham Young. So then she created the reorganized church. That spawned in a different direction. So now you have the two directions that spawned from an original. Then you have people who left the Mormon church when the multiple wives, polygamy was outlawed. When polygamy was outlawed in the 1800s, there was a whole new fundamentalist group that left. the Book of Mormon, but then they took their beliefs and want to still have multiple wives, and they became the fundamentalists. It's like people always attribute them to be Mormons, but they're not.
But they're not. They're their own entity.
Right. So us saying that these were the process, the process church, it's kind of like, they were a spawn of that. They kind of splintered off. I don't know. Just giving you an example.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. I don't discredit the fact that there was the ideology of evil or a form of darkness playing a role behind the curtain of this. But I do feel like the cult activities that were sensationalized by the media may or may not have been happening like they said, because as I read on the process church, and I'm not advocating for or against any type of church whenever we do these things, but me reading a lot about the process church in the past and then refreshing my memory for this episode, they seem more structured.
Yes.
Versus some of the ways that these things were going. Yeah. I mean, again, they eventually disband, but who's to say where they went?
Exactly.
All right. So Scientology, the bane of my existence. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of Scientology, and I don't care who comes at me for that, because when we did this class when I was learning about the ethnographic ways of people of the past, they did bring up L. Ron Hubbard as someone scholars kind of look at as like almost a laughable person, in the sense that he was writing fiction and he was using other people's work, claiming it as his own. And he was a fiction writer, but he didn't expect this to take off like it did. But real quickly, the founder, L. Ron Hubbard, he made statements about how essentially you don't need to heal with outside medicine. You can heal yourself. That's why they have in their religion, they have oh my gosh, auditing. It's called auditing. I couldn't remember the word. Yep. Yeah, and the audit, it's not an audit of your taxes. It's an audit of your trauma. You have to audit your past trauma, which I actually agree with this part of it, that if you audit your trauma and deal with it, you can heal to an extent, but sometimes your trauma is so deep and so hard to break from that you do need someone to talk with you and work it out. You do need to seek professional help. So I agree that it is possible to audit your emotions and heal and be aware. So I'm not in disagreement with that part. Anyways, the Scientologists, they have this whole other system of belief that kind of like created a foundation that the process church was able to pull from. And that's where they kind of pulled out the idea of the dualism and like the inner spirit and healing and like, making it better and blah, blah, blah. But as we said, they also tapped into Satanism. Right. Okay. So let me get into my notes about Satanism.
I would say, I almost feel like you have to know everything about Scientology, the children, and the process church, like understand all of that to then go and understand the whole idea of Satanism, because its evolution, I think, is very much tied in the same basic ideas of evolution of these other things too.
Yeah, evolution of how these things came to be. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And since, you mentioned the satanic panic that was happening in these kind of like beginning in these eras and kind of going in and especially into the 80s with rock music and stuff like that.
Because rock music is the occult,
Right? Yes. Yeah, and like even Dungeons and Dragons and things back then.
Which I think is like, no offense to the people back then, but that was silly.
Yeah, there was a band, and I can't remember which band that they attributed to be Satan worship, and I can't remember what it was called. And yeah, but there was one that kind of originally sparked like, oh my gosh, And then they would be like, oh yeah, it's not Black Sabbath that I'm thinking of. No. But that would be a later one. Anyways, so
we'll ask Jamie. He'll know about it. I'm just going to keep on calling him out.
Yeah. So keep in mind that the modern version of Satanism is relatively new. We dive into the word Satan, and I'm going to say it's the word the Satan. So the Satan, as in the Hebrew Bible, literally means the opposer. It is not a specific being or person that they're talking about. That is something that is furthered in the later church, that as a person, that Satan is a person versus an idea of someone who is an oppressor.
Like somebody who like embodies that idea rather than just the idea of that thing, I guess.
Right. And before I forget, see this book? I love this book here. This is the
Harvard Psychedelic Club.
Yes, I loved that book. There's another book I read, but I didn't bring that one up. That one talks about Timothy Leary and it gives you different studies and interviews with different members of his group. Because there were atheists, there were Christians, there were people of different religions that were in his group. You get different perspectives of different type of people who basically hallucinated with him.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. This book here, love this book. This
The
is
Witch
called
Craze.
The Witch Craze. This is by Roper. This is an amazing book. It gives you a very scholarly take on the development of the witchcraft and where it came, the witchcraft like and heresy trials when people were thought to be witches, what brought that to that point, because it didn't start off as them just being witches. It started as them being heretics, people who opposed the church's ideology, that they were the only ones allowed to have the information to give to the people. So that's a whole nother, whatever. We should do an episode on witches.
I think
Maybe
we should do an episode on witches.
for Halloween. Yeah, we should do some
one of our
kind of
October
cool, like,
episodes.
yeah, we should definitely do that. Okay. The Satan ideology that with those horns and this beast-like with hooves, the idea of who and what Satan was is different from what the old version of Satan was, because the imagery that was created from the witch trials is what's presented today. These are suggestible images that were overlapped and created over time with the interviews of those who tortured women in the witch trials.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes, yes. I mean, this doesn't change just because the image of Satan is not what I feel is real, like the horns and all that stuff. Even though I don't think that's the real image of evil, it's interesting to think that the image of evil of Satan is very similar to the Yad Nagalushi.
That's true. That is very interesting.
It's interesting how evil finds itself to always have an animal-like image.
Mm-hmm.
A snake, a dragon, a beast. It's always something animalistic.
Always something. Yeah.
Very it's never human-like. It's found in humans only to be a possession, but evil never presents itself as originally a human form. Anyways, that's a whole nother story. So it doesn't change the mentality that evil does exist. But in the Middle Ages, the church, like I said, associated heretics and witches with Satan, leading them to the witch trials. But those were just accusations. The accusation of Satanism became weaponized during this Inquisition of the witch trials, though no organized Satanist groups existed at this time. Like I said, one of my favorite books is this one by Roper, which if you guys want to read or watch, if you want to read this book, you can get it on Amazon. It's called The Witch Craze by Lyndall Roper. But back to Satanism as its formal image in cults. Moving to the 19th and 20th century, we have this literary Satanism, this enlightened romantic version where people imagine Satan as this symbol of rebellion, freedom. For example, there's John Milton's Paradise Lost, which is 1667. This portrays Satan as this tragic, defiant hero. Percy Shelley and Lord Byron. Now, these were very notable figures that were two of the most influential figures in Romantic era in the 19th century for like poets. They were seen as radicals and rebels who challenged the social norms. One of them was also like a womanizer, but they also led very dramatic lives. These men romanticize Satan as this revolutionary figure. Okay. Then you have the occultism. This is the esoteric groups like the Hellfire Club that we see in Stranger Things.
Yep.
Yeah, this was the 18th century. This dabbled in more of a transgressive rituals, but these were more like libertine than satanic. So there was kind of like there were still these two different balances where eventually they're going to kind of shift each other together. Ephesus Levi, 19th century cultist. This is he reinterpreted the Satan as a cosmic force of balance. He wrote a book he wrote stuff about it. There's Aleister Crowley. While not necessarily a Satanist, he had this philosophy like do what thou wilt, which is like ritual practices influence this later satanic movement. A lot of times Satan is perceived as like free will, offering free will. So you see that overlap, even if it's not satanic, you see like this rebellion against certain things, this opposer to set ways. That's kind of like the same underlying thought process. 1966. This is in the spawn of like when these murders are about to happen 10 years before everything. Right. In the same time frame of when the Process Church exists, the Church of Satan. So the Church of Satan, which was founded by Anton LaVey, this is marked as the birth of it being organized per se. Codified Satanism. Key ideas, ascetic Satanism is like the symbol of human nature, indulgence, skepticism, rebellion, not literally a deity, just a thought process. The Satanic Bible, 1969, outlined core tenets like individualism, rationalized self-interest, and rejection of authoritarianism. Rituals of psychodrama, like designed to harness personal will and not worship. So a lot of like self-orient, and we talked about this, about self-oriented thought processes versus spiritual ones when we talked about reincarnation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And past lives and stuff like that. Like some of them are more like spiritual growth and some are like, no, I haven't finished my work, so I'm coming back.
So I'm coming back. Yeah. So that's what Satanism like originally was. It was just
it was against the norm. It's like the personal, like you got to think of like the Abrahamic idea of Satan was, or of the devil, I should say, was this creature, this winged seraphim that was in the Garden of Eden that tempted Eve with the truth of all that exists. Like if you eat this, you're going to know everything, but you're not going to die, like you were told. So it's giving Eve the option to know and think for herself versus trusting only God and worshiping him. The same thought process here when I was talking about like it's a self-fulfilling thing versus a worshiping thing.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. There was the Temple of Sect. This is 1975. This is a splinter group founded by Michael Aquino. Focusing on this, it focused on a set of kind of an Egyptian god of chaos, this set. You know, we hear more of like an intellectual, rigorous figure than Satan. And a lot of times when you are on the outside, when someone, and I'm going to refer to just in general because of my own personal experience, when you are not immersed in a religion yourself, from the outside, you do not know what they truly believe. You only know what essentially media tells you or outsiders tell you, and you kind of go on that.
True.
Yeah, because I remember when we first joined the Mormon church, my mom assumed we believed a certain way, and we did not. I'm like, we don't believe that, but she believed that up until like the newspapers came out that the Salt Lake City was having the Olympics there, and they started putting out church beliefs. My mom's like, oh yeah, they don't believe that. I'm like, I've been telling you that.
You're like, yeah, I know. I'm aware. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So like I said, the Temple of Set, like this had this split from the LaVey's church, which was the person who kind of created this whole Satanist kind of thing, focusing on these Egyptian mythologies. But these groups were kind of like very similar. Yeah, they're very similar with the activist groups like the Satanic Temple, which uses Satan as a symbol for political and social issues. These were on the, and the thing is, these groups have millions of followers and various beliefs. The Satanic Panic was a period of this moral hysteria, primarily the 80s, because that's really when the rock band, so like it was kind of building towards the 80s, like the 60s and 70s was kind of like creating the foundation of Satanism, of the modern view versus like the older view, because the older view of Satan was completely different. And it kind of marked this widespread fear of these clandestine cults per se, engaging in these rituals, these child molestations, these murders, and other like atrocities, I should say.
Yeah. It was like everything was blamed on Satanism.
Yeah. And personal thoughts, and this is just me personally thinking, I do believe there was some evil involved in any kind of form of aggression. I do not think that evil necessarily performs it, but that's just me. I think evil, darkness just gives you the tools to access your own free will to do it. And so these people did it, and they believed in it, and they loved the excitement. They felt the energy, and the killing of the dogs, and the drinking of the blood, and all these different things. I feel like there was a huge, like, they kind of like started down a small spiral, just playing around with dark magic per se, or dark evil. And then evil kind of opened its doors. Like, remember what we learned about the Yinagalushi was what was the first thing you had to do?
You had to murder a close family member.
Right. And people can deny, but your animals are close family members.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. My animals are my children.
Right. So again, these are acts that the darkness says, for you to have my tools, you must access this. But these were also young kids that grew up to be very arrogant people that took it a different direction.
Yeah, that's very true.
All right. That's all I have for you. Unless you have questions.
I'm just still thinking about how crazy it is, honestly. I just, as you were talking about truthfully what Satanism actually is, it was interesting because so often people sit there and they talk about Satanism as this occult thing, and it's worshiping like Satan, the
beast
person, the beast, rather than Satanism, the idea. And so I think it was very interesting to learn that Satanism actually isn't about worship. It is about understanding the idea. Not that I necessarily agree with it, but it is interesting to have that understanding. And it also then makes a lot of sense why it was so easy to use it as a scapegoat of, well, this is different from the normal. These are people who are rebelling against what we believe to be the truth, and therefore they must be the reason for all of this going on. Now, I do think that because it centered around this idea, not necessarily of self-indulgence, but of your self-will and stuff that we had talked about, it did probably make it very, very easy for people to take it to very extreme levels when it came to the darkness and wanting to form these actual cults. I think it's kind of sucks that they put this negative spin on it, because I think there is something to learn about the truth of what Satanism actually is. And if you stick with what it actually is and the ideas of it, it doesn't necessarily make those people true evil. I think it makes them very susceptible, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are true evils. So, I think it does kind of...
Well, here's the thing. I don't want to get too much into this because we're running out of time on this one, but we can talk about this completely in a different episode. But you have to know, in order to believe in the good, you have to know that the opposite exists. Again,
yes, it's true.
Do they work in tandem like the process church suggested? I mean, do you think that your belief system of how things came to pass, good or bad, you can't just say that God only meant for the good to happen?
That's wrong.
That wouldn't make any sense, because then we would learn from nothing. But so that's a whole different thing. So I don't even want to get into that, but at the same time,
it is a concept we could talk about.
Yeah, it is a concept we could talk about. We could talk about witches. We could do a witch episode, and we'll talk about like the evolution from heresy to witchcraft to the witch trials and all that stuff, because that was I took an entire class on that.
Y'all get ready.
Maybe I could see as my professor. I could see one.
Yeah, that would be super fun. Get ready for October, you guys, because we're also going to be at a local event coming up here in October 11th and 12th. We're going to be at the local zoo, Golf Breeze Zoo. They have a Halloween event going on in the weekends. We're going to have a booth there, and we're going to be taking suggestions from the public at this event. You guys can, if you guys are local and decide to show up, you can go to this event and you can put in a suggestion for what you want us to cover on our Halloween episode, since Halloween falls on a Friday. So we're gonna have a special episode on that Friday. You can put your suggestions there. We'll draw from that suggestion like bowl or box or whatever people put their stuff into for our episode, for a Halloween episode. So come see us there.
Or if you can't make it down here, you can email us.
That's true. You can.
Yeah, you can email us at info@theparallaxpodcast.com. Send us your show ideas before the 13th of October, because we're going to be there the 11th and 12th. Email us that, and we will try to work it in and put it into our little bowl of tricks. If you want to follow us on social media, you can go to theparallaxpodcast.com. You can click on those icons, give us a shout out, comment, ideas, whatever you want to do down there in the little box. But until then, I'm Karissa.
And I'm Willow.
And until next time, mortals, thanks for listening.
Goodbye, mortals.